Hey everyone, this is Pat. I'm here to do a little video to tell you about a special little car that I got a few years ago. It is the Plymouth Prowler. Okay, so just to make it clear, this little Prowler is not the same little Prowler that I'm referring to. I actually have the full-size version in my garage. The reason I'm doing this video now is because in the garage, it's actually in its own sleeping bag. I actually have a big zippered bag that I keep the car in to help protect it from the winter and all the nasty mess that we get in the garage during this time of year here in Michigan. So in about a month or so, I'm going to go back out in the garage. I'm going to be able to finally take it out of its bag. And there I'm going to actually do another video. I'm going to go through all the things I know about the car, all the stuff that I've learned in the past 4 years or so that I've owned it. And I want to provide that information to people. And also, this video is also to provide some information about not just the basics of the car, but things about the car, the controversies and some of the compromises that those of us owners have had to go through in owning this car. But even more so, I want to go through what I've had to go through myself in terms of why I got this car. There's a lot of people, family members, friends who probably think I'm nuts that I even got this car. And I kind of want to explain, the reasonings why I got it and just the amazing changes this has done to my life and why I think it was worth it for me to do that. So without further ado, here we go. Okay, so let's have some information here on some basics of the car. So basically, the Prowler was built by Chrysler back starting in 1997. It actually went through 5 model years. It had 97, it skipped the 98 model year, and then it went from 99 to 2002. During that time, they built about 11,700 copies of the car. So it's relatively rare. Most people out there, people that aren't really into cars, probably have never even heard of it before, and most likely have never seen one before. I've taken the car to various shows, events, and it's amazing the number of people out there that have never even heard of it. Some people think it's actually a hand-built car, that it's a kit car. They can't believe that actually a major automaker like Chrysler actually built this car. Now, why there were so few of them built and why it only lasted for that many model years, well, I'm going to go into that later. There was a lot of controversy, a lot of reasons why this happened, and some myths out there that are not really true. So I kind of want to go through those later on in this video. So basically, what exactly happened early on? Well, Bob Lutz, who was the president of Chrysler back in the 90s.
Those who don't get it or don't like it never will, and that's fine with us.
Him and his chief designer, Tom Gale, came up with this idea to develop the Prowler. They wanted this car to be like a traditional hot rod car was, like from back in the 30s through the 50s. But it was a factory hot rod, meaning they would actually be built this way to have a lot of the look and feel of a hot rod. It was kind of, the idea came about also because of the Dodge Viper that came out a few years before. The Viper really was considered like the halo car for Dodge. And they wanted to come up with something also for Plymouth, because at the time, the Plymouth brand needed also a little bit of reviving. It had been around since 1929, and it needed to have something to kind of kick it into gear a little bit and get it more, more public interest in the car. Now, obviously that didn't entirely work out due to the fact that the Plymouth brand actually ended in 2001, before the Prowler actually finished its production. The Prowler continued on as branded as a Chrysler. So originally when the car came out, it was, the pricing of it was around, in $1997, it was around $38,000. It got close to $44,000, which, in today's money, that's probably, close to over $60,000. And so it wasn't a cheap car, and it did have a lot of competition at the time. You consider in '97, that was when the next Corvette came out, the C5 model. And so things like that, there was a lot of competition that it had with it, and that probably didn't help matters with the car. But it had, the Viper to go along with it, and so there was some hope there that it would continue with that tradition. It didn't entirely. It was a different kind of car. I mean, there's people out there that made, discuss the way the Prowler is, but the fact is that the Prowler wasn't intended to take over what the Viper was. It was a different kind of car, a different kind of audience for it, And for me, it was something that I was able to obtain, and I realized I could obtain, but a Viper probably not, whereas the Prowler I could. So the Prowler originally was built in the Connor Avenue assembly plant. This is one that's in downtown Detroit. The Viper was already being built there, and so this was built alongside the Viper. The Connor plant was a small plant. It was meant more for specialty cars like this, low volume production cars. And so much of the manufacturing was actually hand built. I mean, there was some robotics involved in taking care of the the frame and so on, some of the aluminum frame that was built in it. But a lot of it otherwise was a lot of hand built that was done. It made it a very special car. And speaking of aluminum, that's what the car was made out of for the most part. This was kind of an experiment that Chrysler was doing to actually have cars built out of aluminum. Nowadays, aluminum manufacturing is very common because it just saves on weight. And so back in the day, 20 years ago, this was a much bigger deal. And so the Prowler having a body-on-frame design, the body-on-frame being a little more of a nod to the hot rod type of design from the old cars. But the fact that it was mostly built out of aluminum was a big deal. This is something that they learned a lot from it, and they used that information that they had in future cars. So this wasn't just an idea just to have a fun car and just make some kind of halo car. It was also a big experiment. It was allowing them to be able to learn about the manufacturing process of aluminum. So when you think about, look at the Prowler, it's actually, again, it's not a very big car. It's only about 14 feet long. But it's actually over 6 feet wide, which is pretty wide for a car. It's a little over 4 feet high, so very low. If you're a big person, like in my case, I'm 6 foot tall, a little over 200 pounds. And so I wouldn't want to be a whole lot bigger to fit in this car. Now, I've seen bigger people in the car, so it's definitely meant for smaller people. If you're smaller than me, you'd be perfect for it. One of the other big things about the car that made a lot of people, attract a lot of attention to this car was simply a design that had never been done well, I should say never been done, but it hadn't been done in many, many years as far as the design in terms of the shape. The Prowler has, in its front wheels are actually outside of the body of the car. And that was unheard of at the time when it was built, and it's still unheard of today. You just don't see that. That's a very unusual design, but it also makes it a very eye-catching, very noticeable. People can't miss this car when it's going down the street. And so that, in addition to that, they also did something that was unusual for its time, is that they had the front wheels and the back wheels were actually different sizes. And by different sizes, I mean really different sizes. I mean, the front wheels were a 17-inch tire with about 235 millimeter width, but in the back, they're actually 20-inch diameter tires, which is about a 295 millimeter width. This was unheard of in those days to actually have two different sizes like that. In fact, the 20-inch tire, or a 20-inch wheel, I should say, was actually the biggest wheel for a production car at that time. Now, nowadays, you see cars all over the place, especially SUVs and trucks that have 20-inch wheels. Not a big deal today. Back in 1997, it was a big deal. Nobody had ever seen a car like that before, and so it was just unheard of at that point to have such a difference in there. Now, because of the difference in the sizes, the car has no spare tire. So there would be no room for it even for one of them anyway, but with two different sizes couldn't be done. So the original car actually had Goodyear tires on them that were designed especially for the car, and they were run flat tires. Now nowadays, if you were to get one of these cars today, you may still have them on them. Probably going to want to replace them because they're 20 years old. That's what I did with mine. I'll go over to that later. But having this size wheel in the back definitely is an eye catcher. I mean, when you look at this thing, it's amazing. And in my particular case, mine has what most of the Prowlers had, and also has the chrome wheels. The earlier Prowlers, the 97 and some of the 99 models had a silver aluminum cast wheel, but they later went on to having this chrome wheel, which has caused some trouble with some people later on because it does, chrome can pit and corrode a little bit. So some copies of the Prowler out there you see may have that. It hasn't happened to mine yet, but it is something that's going to happen at some point. But it's still an amazing look in the car if you can keep it in good condition. The other thing about the car that was kind of a bit of a controversy with it, and something that also, as I'll go into later, kind of influenced my decision early on whether or not I'd want this car, is the fact that it has a very small trunk. The trunk space in this, I don't know the exact dimensions of it, but maybe 2 cubic feet if you're lucky. It's basically a clamshell design that allows the top to fit down in there, but then once the top is down, there's not a whole lot of space left in the trunk. And so this is something that has been a little bit of discouragement, but one of the things that Chrysler did, because they realized this, is that they also developed, with an outside company named Ajax, they came up with a Prowler trailer. It's actually a little trailer that you can tow behind the car. They offered a trailer hitch that you could have installed on the car that you could only use with this trailer. They didn't want you towing anything else. But with this trailer, you could hold a whole lot more stuff. And the trailer was very unique in its design, in the sense that it was made to look like the back end of the Prowler. And so if you follow one on the road, if you see one behind you, you might actually be seeing the trailer, but then as you get closer, you realize that's not the car, it's the trailer. I was able to get one of the trailers myself later, and so in my next video that I do when I take it out of the garage, I'll also show you the trailer and show what an amazing help that is. It's hard to drive sometimes with it. I'll admit it's very hard to back the car up when you've got this trailer behind you, but it is still worth it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to take it anywhere very far. I wouldn't be able to take it on long trips, because once you have another person in your car, you don't have any room for any of your stuff. And so having this trailer to be able to tow behind it has made all the difference. So I definitely would recommend, if you ever were to get one of these cars, is to look into getting one of the trailers as well. They only made a little over 1,300 of those trailers, a lot less than there are of the car, but there's definitely people out there that are selling the trailer, not just with the car if they're selling the car. So it can happen, you can find them. And in my case, the one I found wasn't even the same color as mine. Mine is yellow, just like the model I just showed you. And I was able to get the trailer repainted as yellow because it was blue before. It had been a couple other colors before that, before I bought it. So people repaint them in order to match the car that they have. So again, as I was saying before about the type of material the car was made out of, again, it's a body on frame design, all aluminum. So we're talking about, when I say aluminum, most of the major body panels, talking about the side panels right behind the front wheels, you've got the doors, you've got the hood, you've got the back trunk and the trunk floor, and actually the main tub of the car is all made out of aluminum. Other parts on the outside of the car were made out of fiberglass, like the front and rear fender areas are all fiberglass. And in the front area, the nose is basically essentially plastic. So in addition to those materials, there also was magnesium used. They actually had a magnesium piece that went in the dashboard underneath there to help provide rigidity to the car. Now, because the car is made out of aluminum, it's not going to be the most rigid car. Aluminum can flex somewhat. And so having the magnesium helped a little bit with that. It's not going to be like some cars, especially some newer cars, much more expensive convertibles today that are very stiff and the structure is tight and they're not going to move at all. They're not going to have that cowl shake issue. The Prowler does have that a little bit, I will admit that. But it's partly because of that aluminum design. It's going to have a little bit of a flex in it. And honestly, you get used to it. The one thing you may not get as used to as much is the quality of the ride. Now, as I was noting before, the original car had run flat tires on it. Run flat tires are notorious for being very stiff. You're going to get your body is all that's going to get jarred up really badly. I had neck surgery back when I was in about 2008. And so I couldn't handle that. So soon after I got the car, when I found my car, it actually still had the original run flat tires on it. And not just because the tires were old did I do it, because they had very low mileage on it. That wasn't the reason why. In my case, I had to get the new tires on it just to have something that was not run flat, so that it would be a lot easier on my body, so I can adjust that a little bit. It's still a stiff ride, but it's more manageable. I can handle it, especially on the Michigan roads here. The condition of our roads are not great. And so being able to have that on there has made a world of difference. So I would definitely recommend it if you still have the original tires on it, not just because it's unsafe to have such old tires, but also because it's a much better ride. So I definitely would recommend it. So the other thing about the car that is you have to keep in mind that I found with it is because of the size of the gas tank. Now, the way they designed the car, in the back, you've actually got the transmission is in the back of the car. It's a transaxle. And above that is the gas tank. And that's the reason why there's so little trunk space, because you've got your transaxle, you've got your gas tank, and then you got your trunk. And there was only about this much room left for the trunk, literally this little sliver of space. So the gas tank is small. When I've taken it on other trips, I've found that, especially if I'm towing my trailer, sometimes I can only go about 200 miles on, 2 to 250 if I'm lucky. But it does allow you to get out, stretch a little bit, because I definitely, with a car like this, you need, it's small, it's tight, you definitely need to be able to get out and move around, and this is a good excuse for you to go out and do that. Something else about the car to keep in mind is this definitely is a summer better weather car. There are a few people out there that have actually driven it in the winter. They drive it in the snow. That's fine. You can do that. If you're an expert on it and you've got the right kind of tires on the car, yes, you can probably do that. But the fact of the matter is, one of the things the car does not have is anti-lock brakes. So without those, you have to keep in mind in slick conditions, when I've been driving in the rain, even though I've got nice tires on there now that are new and have good tread on them, they're still summer rated tires. And so the fact is that when you get really slick weather, it can be harder. You definitely have to hold on more. One of the other things too you'll notice about the car is in the interior. This is something where I do like the fact that they did try to keep a little bit of a hint of the old kind of retro car style, and that is the dashboard. In each of the cars, they actually designed the bezel area where all your gauges are to be in the same color as the car. So this is a really neat effect. Some owners have actually gone beyond that and done some customization of their cars, and actually gone out and put even more stuff inside the car, bezels and shifters and all these stuff that make it look like match the car, because they want that color. And I even did that too on a couple of panels on my doors, just to give it a little more color in there. That was one thing I kind of wish they had done. So I added that to mine. One thing you have to note though is when you're looking at the dashboard is that as you're driving down the road, you're looking here, but your gauges are over here because they're in the center of the dash. And so you have to kind of get used to the fact that your speedometer and anything else you're looking at is over here. And that's a little bit disconcerting, I will admit that. So, but if that doesn't bother you, you can get used to that, it's worth it. If it bothers you a lot, this car probably wouldn't be for you, because it would drive you nuts. And admittedly, it did drive me nuts for a little bit when I first started driving it. You have to get used to it, but you get used to it pretty quickly. So not anything to not get the car over. So some of the other things too, again, with the interior, again, if you ever looked at the stereo, it's a pretty basic stereo that Chrysler had, pretty much similar one they had in their cars during that time. But it had one difference, which nowadays would not be a big deal, but it was a big deal back 20 years ago, and that was a CD changer. They actually put the CD changer behind the passenger seat. There's actually a big magazine back there, which you can pull out, and it has a 6 CD changer. Now again, nowadays, I don't really use mine too much anymore. I did use it a few times. Again, not having a radio that can handle that is something that many people have changed out in their cars, because you know your radio is 20 years old, you're going to want a little bit of improvement. It was a decent radio in its day, but nowadays it's a little bit old. Your speakers might have gotten a little worn out. So this is something that I would agree. I haven't done it on mine yet, but it's something that I'm thinking at some point that I may have to do. So one other thing also, that if you look at a Prowler and you start looking at some of the different parts on it, now obviously with the overall look of the car, there's nothing, you would look at it, you think there was nothing in this car that was shared with any other vehicle that Chrysler made. Well, actually they did. In order to make this thing a reality, they had to depend on some other parts in order to make this happen. And so they did rely on what they referred to as their parts bin to fill in some of those things that they didn't have to take the extra time to design and develop. The biggest thing was the engine. Now, in the first model year, in 1997, they had an iron block V6 that was also shared with other, what they call their LH cars, like their Intrepid and the Dodge Intrepid, which I owned one of those. I actually owned 2 Intrepids, one of each generation. And the second generation Intrepid actually had a newer version of the engine, which the Prowler later had as well, pretty much the same one. The Intrepid I had at a 3.2 liter V6. Later on, you know, there was the Intrepid also offered a 3.5 liter, and that same exact 3.5 liter was then offered in the Prowler starting in this 99 model year. This engine, the earlier engine only made about 214 horsepower. The newer engine, the better one, was, instead of being an iron block, was an aluminum block, and although it has about the same displacement, actually made 253 horsepower, and it improved the 0 to 60 times from like over 7 seconds to about 6 seconds. Again, in today's world, 6 seconds, 0 to 60, nobody's really going to think that's a big deal, but it was pretty good back in the day, 20 years ago. And so this is something that I still think is worth talking about. I still think it's worth it to try driving the car, you know, even though it may not be as fast as some of the other ones, but it's definitely held its own back in its day. So some of the other parts that they also had to share, if you looked at the steering wheel, it looks just like the one that was from a Jeep Grand Cherokee, except for the fact that you've got, over the airbag, you'll have the Prowler logo instead of the Jeep logo, which actually makes that part somewhat rare and hard to find, because anything that had the airbag go off, well, that's been ruined. So you can't just, if any of them have been in accidents, it's hard to find another one just like that. But otherwise, the rest of the steering wheel design is the same as the Jeep was. There were also some other things they shared. If you look at the outside door handles, those are the same thing that was in the Dodge and Plymouth Neon. It's the exact same door handles. On the inside, they were the same ones they used for part of the time that they built the Viper. You also had a few other parts, like the vents that are above the radio were actually the same vents that were in the minivans during that time. They also had your front brakes were also shared by the minivan. The rear brakes are unique to the car, so if you ever had to get those replaced, those are harder to find. But the front brakes, same ones that they used in the minivan. So what model years did the Prowler happen? As I was saying before, there was 5 model years. It started in 97. They skipped the 98 model year, and then you had 99, 2000, 2001, and 2002. My particular car is a 2000. It's yellow, as I showed in the model. When I found mine, I actually was able to locate mine in Florida. At the time, it only had 370 miles on it, and I'll go over more of the story of how I came to that in a later part of the video. But that particular one was one I was interested in because it was still a Plymouth. They hadn't changed over to the Chrysler name yet. And again, just to be clear, there really was no difference between the two cars when it went to Chrysler, except for the emblem on the badge. They didn't have the word Plymouth on the back bumper. The Prowler was still there, but they removed the Plymouth and just left it blank for the Chrysler version of it. So that's really the only difference between the two cars in terms of when it went from Plymouth to Chrysler. Other than that, the only other differences you might have noticed if you were to look at different ones is that in the 97 and 99, the bumpers on the front and back are kind of a grayish color. In 2000, they switched them over, they're more black color. Again, not a real big deal, but that was just one other difference. If you were to look at one, you can kind of tell the difference. The other thing you can tell about is you may have an idea what year it was made is based on the color. The car was only made certain colors in certain years. Now, in the first year, in the 97, you could only get it in one color, and that was purple. There weren't very many of these cars made, for sale. I think there was only about 400 of them approximately that were built that were actually for sale. I mean, several others were built as prototypes and pilot cars and test cars, but the actual amount that was sold was not very many. And so they learned a lot from that car. Again, they switched out the engine, they improved some things, suspension, various other things in the car were improved. And that caused a delay, and so by the time they had those things right and were ready to release it again, they were already into 1998, and they decided, let's just make it a 99, and so that's why the 98 model year was dropped. In 99, they started expanding some of the colors. The purple stayed, but they also came out with red and yellow and black. And so that started increasing the interest in the car because now you weren't limited to that one color, and you had the other options. Once 2000 came along, the purple was dropped, but they also started including a silver color, and they also offered a color that was referred to as the Woodward edition, which was a two-tone. It was actually red on the bottom half of the car and black on the top half. That was a very limited model. They only made about 150 of those, so if you get one of those, a lot of people try to sell those for a high price because they think they're very rare. Other colors that they came up with were after 2000. When they came in 2001, they started changing out their colors, and one of the main colors they came out with was kind of a dark blue that is referred to as a Mulholland blue. It was a very dark navy blue. When that 01 came out, though, they also started taking away some other colors. The red went away, the yellow went away, silver still was around, but they also came out with what's called a black tie edition, which was similar to the Woodward, except the colors in this case it was silver on the bottom and black on top. That was another one that only made about 150 of those, so again, a rarer car. And in 02, they started changing out again. Now, silver was still around. They brought back the yellow color, and then they also started offering out a color called Inca Gold and also a candy red color. Now, the candy red was actually the last full production run of the car in 2002. The final car that was built was actually what they call the high voltage blue. It was one special edition with white seats. It was very nice when it actually went to auction. I think it sold for like $180,000 or something like that. So it was a very expensive final car. So one of the things you'll also may be seeing, if you've ever actually seen other Prowlers on the road, you may realize that the car actually has a lot of, many people make a lot of modifications to the car. One of the most common things they do to the car is to remove the front bumpers. Now, the front bumpers have been a very controversial piece of the car. It's something they had to do. Obviously, you couldn't have a car out on the road without some kind of crash protection in the front, but a lot of owners didn't like the look of it. They look like it's tacked on. They don't like it. I plan to keep mine. I still think I have no issue with them. It's part of the original look of the car. It's what I originally liked about the car. one of the quirky things about it that I still liked, so I don't want to get rid of mine. But I understand why some people do that. Other people do a lot of other wild things to their car. I've seen people where they take out the back bumpers and put like a new, what they call a belly pan on the back, which redesigns the whole back end of the car. Some people put fancy flames all over it because, again, it's supposed to be like a hot rod, so they put wild flames on the side. Some people change out the interiors with their own custom interior colors, and as I noted before, the different bezels and things that they'll put in there to make it look different. And then on the more extreme end, there's a few of them out there where people have actually swapped out the V6 and put in a V8 engine. Now, that one obviously, it doesn't fit usually. I think in most examples I've seen, they've had to redesign the hood so that it can actually fit. And also, personally, I kind of wonder how well these would drive over the long term, because that aluminum frame and the twisting and the torque and all that a V8 would have would probably be pretty hard on the car. So I kind of question whether or not that's a great idea for long term, but a lot of people have wanted it. Some people have tried it. A less expensive and radical thing, there's been some superchargers that people have designed that have been able to fit on the car. So there's a lot of the things about the car that you have to probably consider fixing, if you were to get one. And I'm going to go more into that in more detail in my next video when I'm actually able to be out with the car. I'm going to go through all the different things that I found that I had to go with mine. Like I said, mine was a very low mileage model, but that didn't matter because of the fact that things get old regardless of their usage. And so there's certain things you just have to do from a preventative maintenance standpoint to get them done.